interesting because I think what you're talking about with innovation, the Chinese Communist Party, I think they're going to try to command innovation. They're in their latest 5-year plan, Xi Jinping talked about the need to develop the Chinese semiconductor industry, specifically acknowledging essentially that the path that we had been talking about, where they can take IP from foreign companies, is closing. So they need to advance their own semiconductor industry. I guess the question is, will they be able to do it? There was an interesting article recently about how several provinces had pumped a bunch of money into these semiconductor companies, supposedly, that didn't produce anything.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of trying to command innovation, like innovate now.
I mean, that's basically what the 5-year plan is saying. It's like, we need to develop the semiconductor industry. And then that trickles down to provinces being like, oh, we need to develop the semiconductor industry. And then funding a bunch of companies that say they can do it. And then nothing productive is coming out of that so far.
Yeah.
So there's an easy solution to that. And that is China already has, from Beijing's standpoint, they already have a province that makes the world's best semiconductor chips. In fact, 60% of the world is dependent for AI and robotics and other advanced technologies are dependent upon this one company. It's in Taiwan.
That is my favorite Chinese province.
Mine too.
Yeah, it's interesting how like a conversation about, economics eventually like expands out into like even things like the invasion of Taiwan. It's all just tied together.
It's not an invasion, Chris. It's just, bringing Taiwan province back into the fold.
Reunification. Yeah.
Reunification. But this is the important thing. Everything is very tied together now. So how does what happens with China's economy affect the global economy?
Well, so there's a couple different, as you might imagine, there's several different factors there. But let's suppose that China really, and China does. I wrote a piece on this for the Epoch Times a while back. When Taiwan's Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, they're building plants. There's plants in Arizona and Japan. It's a strategic necessity that China be able to capture or have that capacity. It's not a want; it's a need. Because if you don't have that, then they're subject to boycotts and other things, right? So Taiwan, how does their failing economy affect things? Well, it's going to force them, in one sense, it's going to encourage them and give cover, diplomatic cover, economic cover, whatever you're going to call political cover, to go to Taiwan and say, look, we're taking your factory. And there have been papers and articles recently saying, well, Taiwan should have a self-destruct mode on their plants, right? So that if they are invaded, the chip making process goes with it, which is not a bad idea, actually. But look, the worst things are internally, whether it's the pollution of the lakes, the water sources, the farmland, the rampant desertification, all of these things draw in the resources, whether it's forest for some of their industries, like their furniture making industry, or whether it's oil, whatever it is, that's pushing China outward. It has been for 25, 30 years. And they've been very smart. Again, they've been very smart about it. They looked at what Great Britain did as an empire 200 years ago or so. And what they did was very clever. Britain figured out that, look, if we control the sea gates in the world, then we control commerce in the world at that time, and military power, the projection of military power via a navy. So it's no accident or coincidence that the War of the Falkland Islands, that was a sea gate for the Horn of South America, right? The tip that was you controlled access. Gibraltar is another one in Spain. Why is Britain there? Panama is. The U.S. took that role in Panama. Now China controls ports in Panama and
all over the world.
I mean, the entire One Belt, One Road is basically about controlling right? All the shipping ports and
Right. So
train stations. Yeah.
So in that regard, the policy of using the rest of the world to support Chinese Communist Party rule in China and elsewhere as it expands, that's enabling them to do that. And the worse things become in China, the more driven they will be to have foreign adventures.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that you were talking about the South China Sea in 2012 when a lot of the militarization hadn't quite happened yet to the degree that it is now.
Mm-hmm. Well, you start with the steps that you can take easily. You get quick, the low-hanging fruit, as it were, right? The easy victories. And that who's going to stop you? Because at that point in time, it was, the Beijing model and China, the flow of capital and innovation and investment into China was enormous. So who's going to blow the whistle? Who's going to throw up a red flag or, complain about what China's doing in the South China Sea? Right? It was a fly in the ointment. Well, there's a lot of ointment. People ignored the fly. And so China got a very big piece. They did something that they could easily do. It's nearby. And it set a precedent. So now those islands have been around for a decade or so. And there are much more, they're a jumping off point for the rest of Asia. The rest of the Pacific.
I think what's interesting about this analysis is, people talk about if China's economy collapses, it'll damage the global economy. But this is an interesting take that it's actually it's motivating the Chinese Communist Party to become more expansionist, to have even more power and influence globally.
Well, it is, but let's not leave the cultural aspects out of it, right? As I mentioned earlier, when you're pumping out propaganda, anti-Western propaganda, specifically anti-American propaganda, 24/7 in the official channels, whether it's radio, TV, newspaper, whatever it might be, billboards, even, you're creating it. Now you have two generations, right, that have this kind of baseline understanding of the world, and that baseline understanding is that it's China versus the West. It's China's been held down. China's been abused, disrespected, lost face in the centuries leading up to the 21st century. And that's not entirely untrue. So there's that argument. We're getting our back. We're getting our vengeance. We're getting what's justly ours. We're taking back our history. We're taking back China's a great country. We're the most populous country in the world. We're one of the oldest civilizations in the world. Why aren't we should be ruling the world. Why should a nation of 350 or 400 million people have such an outsized impact on the world and control? So there's a lot of that cultural, psychological, historical kind of narrative that make people think, yeah, why not? So.
Well, I think it's important to point out that narrative is one that was, created by the Communist Party and taught to everyone in China from kindergarten on up.
Yeah. Yeah, and the party is using that to, essentially push for their plan of global domination.